Okay, real quick lecture here to wrap up the series of 6, 7, and 8 for the skeletal lecture or the skeletal exam. Let's look at some joints. You have several different classifications of joints according to how much they move. So you have semi-movable joints, and you have fixed joints, and you have freely movable. So looking at your fixed joints, those are fibrous joints, and we also call those synthoarthrosis joints. And a good example of those would be like this skull here. Sutures are synthoarthrosis joints. They don't move. After 2 years old, they're not going to move. Semi-movable joints are joints that are connected by cartilage. So these ribs are connected to cartilage that is then connected to the sternum, because when we inhale, those expand and they go down, so they move. We have another semi-movable one that's connected with cartilage, and that's this pubic symphysis. We need it to be able to move and open up for that baby's head to come through the birth canal. These are semi-movable, joined by cartilage, and we call these amphiarthrosis joints. Amphiarthrosis joints. So your ribs and your pubic symphysis are good examples. Freely movable joints, we call these diarthrosis joints, or what you had probably heard them called, a synovial joint. These are we have more synovial joints than any other joint in the body, or any other of these joints. Synovial is number one. We got the majority of our joints are synovial joints. They're very versatile. We'll look at some in a minute. So, synovial joints, what makes them awesome? Number one is you have what's called a joint capsule. So that's this purple here that's kind of encasing that joint. If you're thinking of a femur and a tibia here, so a knee joint. So you have then the purple, you have a joint capsule. And that joint capsule is lined with a membrane that's called a synovial membrane. And of course, the synovial membrane secretes synovial fluid. So in this joint cavity, we have synovial fluid. On the ends of the bones, of these long bones, we have what's called articular cartilage. It's the same cartilage of when you eat a chicken leg and you take everything off, and on the very end of that chicken leg, that bone, you see shiny, slippery. That's articular cartilage. So just like this here. So it's shiny, slippery, and with the combination of synovial fluid in here, makes it to where they move and glide across each other, and we don't have friction, we don't have pain, we don't have wear and tear. So we have to have those things working in unison. So most of your joints in your body were what? Synovial joints. So let's look at some synovial joints. So a pivot joint we looked at in last lecture in chapter 7, where we had our axis and our atlas rotating on top of each other. So you have an axis, and then we have an atlas that will set on top to where we can turn our head. So that's a pivot joint. It's pivoting from side to side. Where you have a hinge joint, just like a hinge on a door, this synovial joint will go one way. So it'll turn one way. It cannot go backwards. If your elbow goes backwards, and we're going to be screaming in pain. So one way, hinge joint. See that in the elbow as well as the knee. It will hinge back. So just like a door that will swing one way. Not like a diner door that will go out and then swing back in. Can't do it. Gliding joint, you see these in the feet. So when you step down, they kind of slide across each other. A gliding joint, and when you pick up, they kind of slide back and slide down, slide back. Gliding joints. Ball and socket you find in the shoulder and then in the hip. So you actually have a ball of this humerus that fits in a socket of that the scapula has made here. Ball and socket, freely movable. These go in all different planes. They move the most. Saddle joint, the only saddle joint you have is in your thumb. So it kind of goes around, can't quite go back, but it can go around and around and around. Condyloid joint, you find this in your wrist, and you need to know that it flexes. So it can flex, it can extend backwards, and it can also wave at you, so it can go side to side. So again, our condyloid joint will flex, extend, and wave. Condyloid. So which joint offers the widest range of motion? Which type? A hinge joint. You got that motion there. Gliding joint, stepping in our tarsals in our feet. Condyloid joint, flexion, extension, and side to side. Or a ball and socket joint. I didn't have these things. There. Ball and socket that can go all the way around. So yeah, D, ball and socket. So depending on how the joints are shaped, ball and socket obviously can go around and around compared to a hinge that will only slide one way. Will tell you how much movement we're going to have in there. Let's talk a little bit about the shoulder. This is where you find your rotator cuff. So if you've ever heard of a rotator cuff tear, that would be found within the shoulder area. And you need to know that ligaments attach bone to bone. So for this skeletal system, and that will come back again later on. So ligaments attach bone to bone, where tendons attach bone or muscle to bone. So ligaments, bone to bone. You got to know that. Now your shoulder, we've got a bunch of ligaments around it, kind of holding it together, because again, this one has the most range of motion than any other joint in the body or in the skeletal system. So the most range of motion, that means this one is not as stable as all of our other joints. So it's not near as stable. And that's why we do have some ligaments trying to hold this shoulder together, but remember, it's not as stable. We can have some major injuries there. Elbow and its ligaments, the knee with its ligaments, articulate cartilage, synovial joint again, as well as the hip. So, which joint is most likely to be dislocated? So, that means it's not as stable. So, which joint was that? Yes, A, your shoulder. That can be dislocated. You've heard of lots of people having their shoulder dislocated.